Chapter 18. Papa hadn't liked it that Joachim opened the Magic Advent calendar before he and Mama got up. On December 18th, he woke Joachim up. That day there was a picture of a rod with a shining gold ball on the end. That's a scepter. Kings and emperors use rods like that as a symbol of dignity. The round ball is probably meant to be the sun. Joachim unfolded the thin piece of paper which had fallen out and began to read to Mama and Papa. They sat on either side of him on his bed. The Emperor Augustus. A strange procession swept through Thrace toward Constantinople on the Golden Horn between the Sea of Marmara and the Black Sea. They were going to Bethlehem. 500 years had passed since Jesus was born in a stable, was swaddled in cloth and placed in a manger because there was no room for Mary and Joseph at the inn. But that story was familiar all around the world. They stopped in front of one of the city gates, which were guarded by soldiers. The soldiers drew their swords and raised their spears when the first sheep reached the gate. Then the angel Seraphael flew up beside the sheep and placed himself between them and the soldiers. "Be not afraid. We are on our way to Bethlehem to pay homage to the Christ child. You must allow us to pass." The soldiers dropped their weapons and threw themselves on the ground. One of them signaled that the procession could pass through the city gate. It was early in the morning and the city was not yet awake. The procession of pilgrims stopped on a hill with a good view of the harbor and the Bosporus, which divides Europe from Asia. The straits were so narrow that they could see across to the other side. The time is 495. Originally the city was called Byzantium, but in the year of our Lord 330, it was made the capital of the Roman Emperor by the Emperor Constantine. The city was built to be the new Rome, and it was soon given the name Constantinople. It's just under 1,000 years. In 1453, the city will be conquered by the Turks and will be turned into Istanbul. Had the soldiers heard about Jesus? We can take that for granted. The Emperor Constantine made Christianity a lawful religion in the Roman Empire as early as 313. He was baptized himself just before he died. Some years later, in 330, Christianity became the state religion. Look who's here throughout the Roman Empire. How do you remember all the dates? I just have to follow the angel watch. Since we don't have to bother with seconds, minutes, hours, and days, it's not so difficult to remember. Another date we must make note of is the year 395, exactly 100 years ago. That was when the Roman Empire was divided and Constantinople became the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. The angel Seraphael came up and he pointed at a beautiful church. That church is called a basilica and was built in honor of God's wisdom by the Emperor Constantine. In a few years it will be destroyed by fire, but on the same spot the Hagia Sophia will be built. It will stand as a landmark for centuries. Quirinius cleared his throat. "We must get across the Bosporus. That is not then it's not very far to Syria. Dixie!" Joshua thumped his shepherd's crook on the ground and said, "To Bethlehem, to Bethlehem." They ran down through the gate, and before long they were standing in the furthest point of the Golden Horn. At the edge of the pier they were met by a dignified man in colorful clothes, with a glittering scepter in his hand. In his other hand he was holding a thick book. Imperial was already preparing to say, "Fear not," but the regal-looking man paid no attention to the cherub. He walked straight towards them. "I am the Emperor Augustus, and I will accompany you across the Bosphorus. I order you to accept this gesture on my part without any unpleasant protests." He pointed out a ship with large sails. The sheep were already jumping on board. "Then you are one of us," said Ephriel. Elizabeth turned to the angel. "I didn't know an Emperor Augustus was a Christian. The old Roman emperor has been part of the Christmas gospel for as kind of a stowaway for many centuries. And God's kingdom is open to everyone, even people who travel without a ticket." Elizabeth thought the angel's words made heaven seem even bigger than she had imagined. She hid them away in her heart. Soon the pilgrims had crossed the Bosporus. As they landed, Elizabeth spoke to the Roman emperor and asked what kind of book he was holding. She thought he was going to say it was a Bible, or at least a hymn book, but the Emperor Augustus said, "It's a sacred census." He said no more. He was so handsome and so proud, and he clearly did not like talking too long, at least not to little girls. Elizabeth thought that was odd. It wasn't every day that a Roman emperor was able to meet a girl who had run off after a lamb and escaped from a big store in Norway. Joshua struck the ground with his crook and reminded them that they had to leave. But they hadn't gone very far before they stopped on a hill above the town of Chalcedon. The town was teeming with priests. They were like a swarm of bees. "Fear not," said Angel Sapphariel. "The time is 451 years before the birth of Christ, and the biggest conference in the history of the Christian church is being held down there. The town is called Chalcedon, and the priests and bishops from the whole of the Christian world are here." What are they talking about? They're trying to reach an agreement about the correct Christian doctrine. Are they going to agree? After long discussions, they'll finally make a declaration that Jesus was both God and man, and they're discussing many other things as well. Some of them are so eager to determine the correct belief that in their haste they forget what is most important. And what is that? That Jesus came to the world to teach people to be kind to one another. No other lesson is more difficult for a human being to learn, but no other lesson is more important. It's not as important, for example, to know how many angels there are in heaven, or whether God has a splinter in his pinky. Has he really got one? I said it doesn't matter. I told you. It's more important to see the beam in your own eye. Elizabeth thought that was very difficult to understand, but she hid those words in her heart as well. The two wise men were not entirely satisfied. It is, strictly speaking, not necessary to believe in angels at all. Many people believe that such concepts have very little to do with what Jesus wished to teach us. All the angel stories may only be fairy tales, but that Jesus wished to teach humans to be kind to one another is no fairy tale at all. "We angels are not in the habit of using such strong words," said Sapphariel. "All the same, I must say that this is one of the silliest things I've ever heard, at least on this pilgrimage. You should be ashamed of yourselves, both of you. Or you should stay in the Orient and not start wandering west with such irresponsible talk." "Yes, indeed," said Imperial. "You must be ashamed of yourselves." The next moment Imperial did something Elizabeth thought angels in heaven would never do. He put his hand in front of his offended face and thumbed his nose at the two wise men. "Bah to you, yes indeed." And a certain nervousness spread throughout the godly company. The angel Seraphael spread his arms to show that he was not carrying any weapons. It's easy to lose courage when even your nearest and dearest lose faith. But although we can disagree about such important matters of belief, we mustn't, under any circumstances, quarrel. Joshua the shepherd was clearly in agreement with the last speaker, and struck his crook on the ground and said, "To Bethlehem, to Bethlehem." And with that they started moving towards Phrygia. Joachim sighed. "It's silly when grown-ups quarrel, but it's even sillier when the angels in heaven quarrel. These have always been sensitive matters. It's not the first time people have gotten annoyed about a discussion of angels," said Papa. But they didn't disagree so much. The angels and the wise men agreed that the most important lesson Jesus wanted to teach people was that they ought to be kind, and that can, in fact, be much more difficult than believing in angels. Papa opened the atlas and pointed out Constantinople, which is called Istanbul today, as well as the narrow Bosporus Strait where the Emperor Augustus met them on the ship. In the pancake book, he found the old city of Chalcedon, where the priests met to discuss Christian doctrine. When Mama came home from work that afternoon, she had a large envelope with newspaper articles. She'd been to the library, and she found out newspaper articles about Elizabeth Hanson disappeared in 1948. The family sat around the coffee table reading the old cuttings. They examined the picture of Elizabeth Hanson more carefully. Could the two pictures of the same Elizabeth be the same? Both of them have fair hair. Don't they both have a slightly pointy nose? Papa was more interested in the disappearance. He'd read the old newspapers. Her mother was a teacher. Her father was a well-known journalist. Only her little knitted cap was found. Otherwise, the police have no clues. "They hadn't read the Magic Advent Calendar," said Joachim. "Even if they had, they couldn't have arrested an angel." After Mama and Papa said good night, Joachim put the light on again. It occurred to him that he hadn't looked at the picture. So he closed all the doors on the Advent calendar, and it happened again. The picture showed Mary and Joseph leaning over the baby Jesus in the manger, and in the background the wise men and the angels descending through the clouds to tell the shepherds. But high in the left corner there was a picture of two men in fine clothes. Unlike all the others, they were standing with their backs to the scene. Joachim had seen them there many times before, but now he was certain that they were supposed to be Quirinius and the Emperor Augustus. But only at this moment did he notice that the emperor was carrying a scepter. Had he been holding the scepter in his hand when Joachim had been given this calendar, or had the scepter drawn itself in? Good night.